I don't know if you guys heard about this story, but it's a story that went viral. It's actually a very sad, traumatic story, and it really captured my heart. But I've been contemplating whether I wanted to talk about it because it's so sad. But I do think it's important that we do talk about it because there's a very sinister, evil um, way that people use religion a lot of times to manipulate people. And I know that a lot of you heard of all those different stories out there where people used their platform and used the word of God and religion to manipulate people, and people tragically ended up, losing their lives in different stories. I'm trying to remember the story of the guy that was the pastor who had all of his congregation. He was manipulating his congregation and to do, follow all his crazy commands to the point where they ended up killing themselves. And this story is similar. However, it relates to a father. It's so sad. So a lot of you guys know when there's child custody battles, when couples split up, there's, when it relates to toxic individuals in the relationship, it can be very dangerous for the children. I mean, grave danger. I know you guys have pretty much heard of stories where, um, sorry, where fathers brutally take the life of their kids in different ways. But this case is even more sinister because this man took control and consumed the mind of his teenage daughters and used religion to manipulate these kids. It's so sad how they use religion for evil reasons. It's just dark. That's why I said one of the things I talk about on this channel when it comes to religion is to study to show yourself approved. So you should study the word for yourself but unfortunately, when we have vulnerable children who rely upon their parents to be their source of wisdom, their source of guidance, it's more dangerous. And this sinister man, I believe in my heart, was angry because his child's mother, she left him and she obtained primary custody of the children. He was angry, he was evil, and I believe he had mental illness and maybe even was operating under the spirit of Satan. And he used religion to manipulate these girls. My theory about this story is that he embedded a lot of fear in them, and he brainwashed these girls to tell them that if they didn't obey their father, that they would go to hell and they would suffer and stuff like that, and that he somehow used religion to manipulate them into thinking that, oh, your mother is evil because she doesn't follow our religion, and so if you go back to her, then you're going to go to hell because she doesn't follow the religion. So that's the type of way that he was manipulating these girls. And they ended up starving to death. Now, starving to death can be a very horrific way of dying. So my theory in the story, and we'll go into some of the allegations, but my theory before we get into the story is that he might have, I believe, this is my theory, because it takes a lot for a kid to starve willingly. There's been a lot of stories where kids are starving and they'll sneak out the house, they'll go to neighbors and different people like that to try to get food. But these kids actually was willingly under subjection of starvation. They didn't go out, they didn't seek help, they didn't want to see their parents. So my theory is that he manipulated them, he brainwashed them into saying, we need to obey God, we need to be like Jesus. And he read probably the passage where Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, as a way of sacrifice to God. I believe he used the Bible to trick them into saying, oh, you need to show God you love him and you need to show him you honor him. So you need to sacrifice food for 40 days, 40 nights, I think, to give your sacrifice to God, to show yourself worthy unto him. This is my theory. And so that makes me believe that would be one of the reasons why, because they're so subject to his manipulation and control, mind control, that they thought, oh, yes, okay, this is what we need to do to show God we love him. We need to sacrifice food for our love for God. So that's one of the reasons I think why they never reached out to anyone. They didn't go ask for their mother to see their mother. They didn't even want to see their mother, which is odd because she was the primary caregiver. So he really got into the mind of these kids and used fear of religion. And it's sad because there are a lot of toxic, evil people out there who will use the word of God to manipulate people. The word of God says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spirits and principalities. So as I mentioned before, the enemy knows the word more than we do. He was actually in heaven and was a fallen angel. So he knows the word, and what he does is he goes into the world and he uses people and people to manipulate the word. There's people in the church that does it. There's religious leaders. There's individuals like this man who brainwashed and manipulated his daughters. Because enemy knows the word so well, he uses these people to manipulate other individuals who may not know the word very well. That's why God says, study to show yourself approved. He said that for a reason, because if you know the word for yourself, then you can't be moved and manipulated by individuals like this, sinister, evil people like this. But that's my theory, guys. Let's talk about what the allegations are. You guys let me know what you guys think. But from reading the story, that was my whole belief. But basically, the father of 2 daughters, it's a very sad story, starved to death in Renton apartments, medical examiner finds. So let's go into the story. This happened in Renton, Washington. A father and his 2 teenage daughters were found dead in a Renton apartment. This was back in December of last year. On Thursday, the medical examiner ruled they all died from starvation, ruling the father intentionally starved himself days after his daughters died. That's why the whole story, the way this lines up, it really makes me think that he manipulated them into fasting as a form of sacrifice to God. But in his mind, his sinister mind, he knew that they were going to die. And that was his intention, for them to die so that he could get revenge on the mother for leaving him and basically getting primary custody, because he was an angry, evil man. And he knew he was going to be criminally held accountable for that. So then after they died, he then starved himself and died. That's what I think. This sounds like, oh goodness, what is the name of that guy, guys? Tell me, guys. The guy that was the pastor who had his whole congregation drink this poison. I believe it was like a Kool-Aid thing, and then they all died or whatever it was. What was the name of that guy? His name is well known. But Renton police discovered the bodies of 33-year-old Manuel Gill, 17-year-old Adriana Gill, and 16-year-old Marielle Gill in an apartment on December 11th last year. This story is so sad. Adriana and Marielle's body were found wrapped in blankets on the first floor, while Manuel's body was found in an upstairs bedroom. Wrapped in blankets. Interesting. This man intentionally did this. It's sick. He was so manipulative with his words and used religion to do this. This is sick. Autopsy revealed the girls both died on December 5th, and then Manuel died December 11th. I really believe this was a form of fasting. I really do. A sinister one. The King County Medical Examiner said there was no obvious mechanism of death for the 3 and conducted a toxicology analysis. It found the father and daughters were emaciated and there was no food in the house, no other pathological or toxicological cause were found. Fox News 13 spoke to the girl's mother, Betsy Alvarado. She lives in Everett. She said she had legal custody of her girls. See, that's what I think. This man was bitter and angry, and he manipulated these girls. He knew the whole time he was going to have these girls do this so that they could die, because he wanted to get back at Betsy, basically. It's evil, sinister thing. Very sad. She lives in Everett. She said she had legal custody of her daughters with Gil, and allowed court-ordered visits on weekends. So the father had court-ordered visits. He didn't like that. He was bitter and angry because of that. Because he was, first of all, mad because Betsy left him. And then second of all, he felt he got the short end of the stick. You know, he's like, I'm only getting the weekends. She's getting all this time. I feel like the system's done me wrong. I feel like Betsy's done me wrong. And this is what a lot of men who are bitter, they fall into these traps. When they feel that their kids are taken away from them, they get put on child support. The women leave them, all these different indicators. They start to become bitter and angry, and they start to think up if they have mental health issues or stuff like this, or they're just evil or sociopaths like this man probably was. Then they start thinking of very sinister, evil things. So he used the manipulation of religion to impart fear into his vulnerable 16 and 17-year-old daughters. You guys, this is sad. It's so sad. Ugh, guys, sorry if I pause on this one. This one's a very sad story. However, Adriana and Gil had worked together to co-parent, but during the pandemic, she noticed changes in the girls. So, and even this was during a time of the pandemic. So we know, guys, that during the pandemic, a lot of domestic violence and issues in the households of many families started to arise during the pandemic. Some weird things were happening. We're hearing a lot more people being unalived by their spouses, kids being unalived. It just was a very dark, sinister period. So this makes sense that during the pandemic, she noticed changes in the girls because that's when he's been working on the girls. When they came over during the weekends, he started manipulating them with the word. And the word, it's very, very scary too. Like I said, if you don't know the word for yourself, it's easy for you to get manipulated because they use the word to impart fear into you. One of the ways they do that is just talk about, you're going to go to hell, you're going to suffer, you're going to burn, and all these things. They just put all these scary visuals in your head of what you're going to go to if you do certain things. And sinister people, they're very good at this. Sinister people are very good at this. They know how to use fear as a way to impart terror into people and to subject them to control and whatever they want to do. It's very sick. So if you don't know the word for yourself, you can easily fall prey to these individuals. But these girls, they kind of were at a loss situation because they were depending upon their parents to show them the way. Their parents could do no wrong in their eyes. These kids were still developing mentally. So anything that their parents said, they took it as the gospel. So they have their father here using a powerful tool of fear to impart into them so deeply to make them feel as though they had to do everything their father said. And as he captured the mind, it's very dangerous when you get a hold of the mind. When he captivated these girls' minds, then he was able to retain control and make them do anything that he told them to do. This is why I think my theory is he basically told them that they needed to fast to show a sacrifice to God, and probably read them the passage about Jesus fasting in different periods in the Bible where different people had fasted. And that was one of the ways that they showed their sacrifice to God. I think he used that to get them to subject themselves to this torture of starvation, because no child is going to just intentionally suffer through starvation. Starvation is a horrible thing. I know a lot of you could probably say there's times when you've been so hungry, you become hangry, right? You get angry, you get moody, you can't think, you can't do anything else until you get some food in your stomach. You're like, I can't even talk to you right now until I get something to eat. Don't even say anything to me. I mean, I know guys have at least experienced that. So to have two teenage girls who had the opportunity to go back home to their mother, who was the primary caregiver in this situation, could have easily left, if they felt that they were being starved. They didn't do that. So that to me stuck out. Very odd, because I have heard of many prior stories of children being subject to starvation. And in pretty much 80% of those cases that I've read, they usually sneak out of the house, go to a neighbor, ask for food. For many periods of time, they're going to different neighbors, sneaking out, asking for food. But these girls didn't do that. So that means they intentionally subject themselves to starvation, which means they had to have been mentally manipulated into that. And the only theory I could think of, and you guys let me know in the chat if you think of any other theories, is that he used fasting as a way to say, oh, this is a way we're going to show our love and sacrifice and devotion to God, is that we'll fast unto him, and then he's going to bless us and give us all these wonderful things, So then they intentionally subject themselves to it, not realizing that their poor bodies could not sustain. He probably used the 40 days, 40 night thing, guys. Their poor bodies couldn't sustain, and then they died. That's what I think. This woman, though, guys, the mother is suffering so bad. She says, um, she said her daughters became extremely religious and refused to see her. So here's where I think the ex-husband, the dad, started telling them that their mother was evil. Started manipulating them, saying, your mother doesn't go to church, she doesn't believe in God, and if you go back to her, you're going to go to hell. You're going to suffer if you speak to her, because she doesn't serve God. She's evil. She's the devil's. You got to stay away from her. It's so sad. So the girls, they're so vulnerable in their mind. Their mind's not really mentally developed yet. So they're going to believe anything that their parents tell them. So unfortunately, they believed their dad. It's sad. They believed him, and they stopped going home to their mother, who was the primary caregiver. And this mother, she went through so much mental anguish, and she's suffering so bad, guys. It's sad. She said, I cried so many nights. It is sad. Imagine, I can picture her at home just in utter torture every day without her girls. And just to be rejected by your own children, that is the worst pain ever. Children that you gave birth to, children that you love more than anything in this world, for them to reject you is the worst pain. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. The worst pain ever. For any parent to feel that their children don't want to see them. She went through mental anguish and torment every night, every day, 24 hours a day. She thought of those girls, and to know that they're dying now, so they're dead now, and she can never see them again. Oh gosh, guys, it's so sad. So she said, I cried so many nights trying to convince them to come back, but they felt like if they lived with me, they would burn in hell. See, exactly, that's what I just said. That my theory was of that, but now look, it's showing here that that's what he told them, because he told them that her mother was not a believer, that she was not of God, that she was, satanic, and she was of the devil, and if you go to her, then you're going to burn in hell if you ever be around her. So they were fear. He imparted a deceptive, demonic fear into the girls. It's sad. Their mind was so convoluted with all of these lies, and they didn't know what to believe, but they knew that he was, their dad. So they were like, well, it must be true because he's our dad. So they didn't question it. They just believed it to be true. And they were so fearful of the possibility of burning in hell and, the lake of fire. And just, they make, they give these pictures of just how tormenting hell is, that these kids were terrified. It's like a horror movie. It's like you're taking a 5-year-old to a horror movie. I mean, a child seeing that's not developed could experience the worst terror and fear and torture as a child, and they believe that stuff is real. So then you take the little kid home and you put them in the bed, they're going to have nightmares, they're not going to be able to sleep because they think it's real. So, I mean, even though these kids were 16 and 17, you're giving them a picture of hell, and it is a reality, and they think, oh, this is a real place, I'm going to go there if I go back to my mom. They were terrified, like it was a real horror movie in their mind, a real scary place for them. So he used fear, basically mental anguish and mental fear, to subject them to mental control. And I think he then made them sacrifice food as a way of honoring God, but in a sick, sinister way, because his whole intent was the whole time was for them to die. So that because he was angry and bitter at the mother. He was angry and bitter at the mother. And he felt that if I cannot have my kids, meaning if I can't have access to them as much as I want, I only get to have weekends and you don't. If I can't have my kids the way I want, if I can't have you back, Betsy, then no one's going to have the kids. And I'm going to take them with me to the underworld, basically. That's what happened, in my opinion. But she said because they wouldn't be able to follow God's word the way they're supposed to, she said. So he told them this. This is his words. He told them that they would burn in hell if they go back to the mom because she's not religious. And so they're not going to be able to serve God the way they should. So they need to stay and live with the dad. That's what he told these girls. It's so sad. So Alvarado tells Fox News she tried to intervene, but with the girls being teenagers, she didn't have any options. And that sounds realistic because when they get older, they can voice their opinion as to what parent they want to stay at. And because the father manipulated them so much, he subject these girls to so much control that they followed their father's every deceptive move, and it cost them their life. It's so sad. She said, it scared me a lot. I called CPS. I told them, CPS, the girls don't leave the house. And they never left the house. They stayed in the house. Imagine for a teenager. I mean, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, they love to go to prom. They're involved in some type of sports, cheerleading. They go hang out with friends, have boyfriends. But they were subject to this religious control, mental mind anguish, that they didn't even leave the house. That was already a red flag that something really sinister was going on in their mindset because of the mental control the father had over them, using religion as a form of a fear tactic. So sad, guys. They don't go to school regularly. That things weren't right. That's what the mother said. So he even pulled them out of school because that's what your abusers will do. They try to isolate you. That's what he did. He isolated these kids. He kept them in the house. They didn't have any friends. They couldn't go out. They couldn't even go to school. They couldn't see their parents. And at this time, because it was during the pandemic, it was easy for him to do that because, of course, the schools were closed, right? So they could stay at home a lot of times. So he had an easier capability to manipulate them because they weren't able to go to school during the pandemic. So it's sad that he used the pandemic as a way to isolate these girls and ultimately cause them their torturous life. They suffered. Starvation is, I know you guys have probably went through it. It's the worst feeling to starve without, hunger. I can't even imagine. The cause of death for all three were determined Thursday to be starvation. So sad. According to the medical examiner, Manuel's death was ruled a suicide due to self-conclusion. I don't like using that word. Sorry, guys. It was ruled a self-conclusion due to the timing, as the girls' bodies were already wrapped in blankets, likely having died days before him. So after they passed away, which was his intent, he wrapped them up into blankets, and then he proceeded to starve himself. Sick. This man was mentally ill. I think he had a sick, sinister psychopath type mindset. There's a lot of sick people in this world, you guys. Just, man. With no way to determine the girl's state of mind and intent, the medical examiner formally pronounced the manner of their deaths as undetermined. I really think that this was a homicide. Well, not at the hands of. It was like a mental homicide. Isn't that weird? Because he captured their mind and made them voluntarily starve themselves. Was it like an unintentional self-conclusion? I don't know. Because I don't think they knew that they were self-concluding. I don't think they knew that they were doing that. I think that they were so mentally manipulated by the father, they thought, oh, we need to fast to sacrifice and show our love, because that's what the dad told them. So I don't think they knew that they were going to die, but the father knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. Alvarado tells us she is not satisfied with that answer. Of course she's not, but there's nothing the coroner can do. I mean, they did die of starvation, but there was absolutely nothing. Probably when the coroner did the autopsy, I guarantee there was absolutely nothing in their stomachs and nothing even, in their colon, nothing, period. It was wiped clean, because that's how they can tell that it was starvation. And of course, seeing their weight and everything like that as well. Alvarado tells us she is not satisfied with the answer. Sad that she doesn't have any closure either. Man, and she didn't get to talk to her kids for so long, so it's sad. She didn't really know what was going on. All she could know is that he was manipulating the kids, and her probably knowing how this father is, and probably he used those same manipulative tactics on her, but she was able to be strong enough to break out of it on her own, and that's probably why she broke up with him in the first place. She says their state of mind was, oh my God, we're going to burn in hell if we don't do what Daddy says Alvarado. Exactly. See? So he had so much mental control over these girls that he was able to get them to do whatever he told them to do. And he used fear, spiritual fear. He used the spiritual fear and lies, using the Bible, which cost them their life. So this is a sad story, you guys. It just goes to show us that We need to study to show ourselves approved. You need to know the word independently. You cannot depend upon other people, especially people in the church and pastors and other people, because if you come across someone who is like this sinister man, it could cost you your life. It could, because you will be so you will be subject to their control. And they use fear. They use fear tactics. I know you guys probably, if you ever gone to out in public somewhere and you see those people on the corners and they're waving the Bible and they're waving the signs and they're talking about, you'll burn in the lake of fire if you don't give your life to God. Those are people you got to be careful of, those type of people, because they're using fear as a way to draw you into God. God is not the author of fear, but a love, peace, and a sound mind. See, if you knew the word like that, you would know this is not of God. If they have to use fear to get me to serve God, that's not of God, because his word tells me God is not the author of fear, but of love, peace, and a sound mind. And when I'm hearing this person on the corner, I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling anguish, and I'm not coming to God in love, peace, or sound mind. I'm coming to him because I'm afraid, because I don't want to go to hell. See, so that's an example of you having to know the word for yourself. You see how I was able to quote that scripture without any Bible or anything around? Because I've studied it. So if someone comes to me with that fear tactic, I know that person is not of God. And I can easily, disregard that, close that person off, and keep it moving. You have to know for yourself. Because if you don't, you can end up falling prey to these people. They're very cunning. There's even people like this online that use religion. It's dangerous. They're using religion to teach polygamy and saying it's a part of God's covenant and what his will is. And see, if you don't know the word, you will be a victim of those people, because they're cunning. They're very articulate. They're very good with words. That's why they're on YouTube. Very good and smooth with words. And so you'll hear them and they'll use religion to say, this is what God has commanded us to do, to be a polygamy and, share your husband, all this stuff. And you will fall prey to that, because if you don't know the word, you're going to rely upon someone else who appears to know what they're talking about. Appears to know. Notice the key word I use there, appears. Because they're so good with using their words. So sly and slick with the tongue. So that's why you have to go into the Bible. You have to study and know the scriptures and then match it up with what the people are saying. And if it's not lining up, then just say, I'm going to go ahead and disregard this person, because they're talking contrary to what God is about. I think that's what this story really teaches. It's a very sad tragedy. But the thing is, this was something that the kids really could not understand, because they were 16 to 17 years old and subject to their father's control. And they depended on their parents to be their guide. So it's just sad. But let's watch this little short clip from the news report about it.
$5,000, and this one is $3,000.
There's so many pictures here.
Betsy Alvarado's home is full of photos of her kids.
This is Adriana, and she was the sporty one. And this was Marielle, and she was very artsy.
Those photos are all she has to remember them by.
They did everything together.
In December 2021, the two sisters and their father, Manuel Gill, were found dead inside a rented apartment. 7 months later, the King County Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death for all three was starvation. But the manner of death for the girls, still undetermined.
It made me very angry, because to me there is no undetermined.
According to the medical examiner, all three were emaciated and there wasn't food in the home. Investigators found written materials about fasting. Their father's death was ruled a suicide.
Didn't I just say that, you guys? I didn't even watch this video yet. And you just heard him say there was writings about fasting. This man intended this. He manipulated the Bible regarding fasting. I just said this and I hadn't even watched this, you guys. I did it. I just clicked on it. I saw the title. I was like, okay, this is probably going to be a good video. But I didn't even know what it had on it. But it starts talking about fasting. What did I say? I was like, the only logical inference I can think of is he had to have used fasting. He used that passage where Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So he got rid of all the food. His intent from the very beginning was for those kids to die. He knew those kids were not going to be able to make it past 40 days or make it through a 40-day fast. He knew that. His intent was for them to die because he was angry, he was bitter, and he used religion as a way to manipulate these kids. Isn't that sick and sinister? Sick. Okay, now I got to rewind this because now I'm like, what? It just confirmed it. Crazy. Okay, I got to rewind this, guys. This is that part.
All three were emaciated, and there wasn't food in the home. Investigators found written materials about fasting. Their father's death was ruled a suicide.
Written materials about fasting. Isn't that a sick way to murder your kids? See the coroner can't rule it that because they don't have the concrete evidence, but us being spiritual, we know exactly what's going on. That he used fasting as a way to murder his kids. That's a sick way to do that. Sick. Child neglect, murder. But the coroner's not going to ever get to that because, of course, he didn't get into detail of that. He would have to know the spiritual aspect of fasting and look at the spiritual component of that to put the pieces together to determine this to be child neglect, murder, basically, homicide. But he's not going to get to that. Child neglect, But that's crazy, guys. That is sick that this man is evil. I haven't heard of a father going this route to take out his kids. I mean, we've seen it all. Shooting the kids. The fathers have done that. Throwing kids off buildings. I'm sorry, these are sick things, but this is stuff I've seen in the past with these fathers, what they've done. Drownings, all the sick things that these fathers have done that I've seen in the reports lately. There's been a lot lately going on with these families. But never have I seen one where a father uses religion to manipulate his kids to fast. And I just told you guys, before I actually went into the story, I wanted to give my theory first, and then I was going to go over the content to then wrap it up and see what, other things that I could find. But it's already confirming my theory because I'm like, thinking in my mind, I'm like, what other logical reason for why these kids would just voluntarily not eat? It doesn't make sense. No kid's going to do that. They're going to get out of that house. They go talk to their mom. Mom, his dad's not feeding me. I want to go home. But they had to been so subject to this man's mental control. And he used this fear. He probably used different passages in the Bible and showed visuals of what hell looks like and what they would go to if they didn't obey him. And then he was like, well, if you really want to show you love God and not go to hell, that you need to sacrifice and starve yourself to show God you love him. And we need to do it 40 days and 40 nights like Jesus did. And then that will be your ultimate sacrifice to God. But see, the kids, they didn't know that they were going to die. They didn't realize that. They're thinking, oh, okay, I need to listen to my dad. I need to sacrifice. So they did the fast. And he all along knew that they were going to die. He knew those kids were not going to be able to make it past 40 days. And he did it in a brutal way where they probably didn't even have water. There's different types of fasting. Some people will do fastings. I know, like at my church, we'll do different types of fasts. You just pray and figure out what fast you want to do. Sometimes people will fast from sunrise to sunset, and then they'll eat. Some people will do a water. They'll just drink water, and that's it for a couple days, and they'll do that water fast. Some people will just juice. They'll just have juices, like natural juices, of course, not the ones with all the preservatives and everything. But they would just do natural juicing. Some people will fast from fast foods, processed foods. Like there's different types, okay? But this man was intending for these kids to die. So my theory is he told them no food, no water for 40 days, 40 nights. Those kids with their body makeup was not going to be able to make it past that. But in their mind, they see this passage of Jesus doing it. And so they don't realize that they're going to die. Right? They're thinking, oh, Jesus did it. This is the way he showed he loved God. But the father used fear. He made these kids so scared. They were so terrified that they felt that they had to do this. in order to avoid going to hell. He used that hell. He waved that hell all over the place. It's just so sad, guys. Man, and it's crazy that this I'm just still shocked that this video is confirming what I just said. I'm like, what? So I gotta rewind this again, guys. Rewind it one more time.
Materials about fasting. Their father's death was ruled a suicide. It's about fasting. Their father's death.
So undetermined.
According to the medical examiner, all three were emaciated and there wasn't food in the home. Investigators found written materials about fasting.
Exactly. That's where the detectives in the coroner need to look. That's how they'll find the answer. They say undetermined, but no, just look at the materials about fasting. He gave the written guidelines to them of how these kids died. In that material, it probably was telling the details of what they had to do. No food, no water, how many days they would have to do it. You take that information, take the biological makeup of physical makeup of these kids, put that together and say, under these circumstances that is written in this material, could a 16-year-old, 17-year-old be able to survive this duration of time without food and water? And that will give them the answer. But see, when they don't, when these experts and coroners and officers don't have that spiritual aspect of it, and they're thinking from a layperson's perspective without they have to use that religious component, they're not going to be able to determine that. So unfortunately, the mother's going to have to get a hold of these materials, and she's going to have to make that own analysis for herself. But the coroner needs to do that, because see, coroners don't just use the body, basically. They don't just examine the body when they're determining cause of death. They use external incidents in the case. So, for example, they'll look at the police report, what happened actually in the situation. If the police officers will provide written materials, whatever factors were involved when that person died, they use that, plus in conjunction, they examine the human body. So the coroner needs access to those fasting documents, because I guarantee you in the writings, he wrote out detail of what the fasting entailed. And if they can use those detailed materials and match it up to what was the height, weight, physical makeup of these girls, that would give him the answer of what caused these girls' death, which would lead back to child neglect, which would then lead back to, it's a weird way of kind of diagnosing this one, because you can't say homicide because it's not at the hands of the father, but it's like a manipulative homicide. It's weird, right? It's like a manipulative way, like he mentally homicide. And there's no, okay, that is not an actual term, guys. I'm just making that up. I'm just saying he manipulated these kids into killing themselves, basically, without them intentionally doing it and being aware that they did it. They inadvertently took their own lives by voluntarily not eating, but they didn't realize that they did. So in my opinion, I feel it was the father's manipulation. It was his fault. That's just my opinion.
Death was ruled a suicide.
His death was considerably after that of the girl, somewhere between 5 to 10 days. He would have known what was going to happen if he continued not to eat.
According to the medical examiner,
exactly, he knew the whole time. I guarantee they need to, you know what they need to do? They need to research his Google searches. They need to look at all the things that he searched on that computer, because he probably researched how long does it take to starve to death, with this physical makeup of his kids, his 16 and 17-year-old, how long does it take for a human body to, die from starvation? And that's what he used to basically write up this fasting detailed materials of what those girls needed to do to serve God, allegedly. He used that manipulation of God, basically religion. But I guarantee you, if they look at the searches that he did, plus use those written materials, they will be able to formulate what happened in this case. That this man researched this to figure out how long it had to take for them to starve to death. No food, no water. They didn't even have water, I guarantee you. They didn't have water. They probably dehydrated. Now, I guarantee that was also part of it. And based upon his research to find out how long he would have to do this, that's what he told the girls to do. And then he just went ahead after they died. He probably was eating a little bit to sustain himself, just not a lot, a little bit, to sustain himself so that they could die, and then he proceeded to then starve himself the remainder of the days so that he could die. That's what I think. That's my theory. You guys tell me what you think.
Deaths are undetermined because there isn't a way to know their state of mind and intent.
Their state of mind was fear.
Hogwash. You have the state of mind, you guys. We just, do I got to go back to the part? They have it. It's in writing. That's what I'm saying. A lot of these people, when it comes to religion, a lot of these investigators, they overlook the evidence. When it's religion, you have to look at the Bible, the materials that they were relying upon. And in this case, he gave a written guide to you of what was the mindset. That was their mindset. What was in the writing was what they read and what they depended upon, because the Father read that to them and told them what they needed to do. That is the mindset. That is the mental intent. So again, this is frustrating, because now this mother's going to be in mental anguish for the rest of her life, because they have the evidence right there in front of them. The fasting materials that he wrote out. This man wrote out the whole intent, the kids' intent, because they adopted their father's mindset, because he fed them this fear and what they needed to do to serve God, allegedly, because that's what they thought. But he went over this whole written material, fasting, and that was their mental mindset of to starve themselves. That's what happened. Oh, this poor woman's going to have to be mentally in anguish when the investigators have the answers in the written material. This is so frustrating.
That was their state of mind. Do what Daddy is saying that we have to do to not burn in hell.
You're making it sound like they had the decision in order to, if that they were going to eat or not, and to take their own life or not. But they were children.
Betsy.
Right. Stepdad knows what's going on. They were children. Their mind was not their own, basically. They relied solely upon their father, who used that to manipulate these poor girls and use fear. Fear. Again, remember what the Bible says. God is not the author of fear, but of love, peace, and a sound mind. So that was Satan working in that man. There's nothing about God in that man, the father, the real dad, because he used fear to torment these girls into starving themselves. That's what he did. Fear to mentally torment these girls. They lived in fear each day, and they starved themselves in fear each day. Mental anguish. Isolated them. He knew he had to isolate them, because if they went to school or if they had friends, those friends would have been like, girl, what are you talking about? This is some crazy stuff. And then they would have been, knocked out of that spell that he put on them, basically the mental manipulation he put on them. And they would have got back to reality and said, oh no, we need to go back to mom. This man, her dad is crazy. So he had to isolate them in the house and keep them there where they fasted to death. They fasted to death, guys. That's so sad. Ugh.
Believes Manuel's extreme religious beliefs led the girls to cut themselves off from the world. She says Manuel followed a sect of the Black Hebrew Israelite faith.
What? I'm sorry, guys. This Black Hebrew Israelite faith has been getting in trouble on social media everywhere. There's another YouTuber in that Black Hebrew Israelite faith too. And that group seems to be doing a lot of crazy stuff. I keep hearing a lot about Black Israelite faith. Tell me if you guys have heard about this group. Please, somebody in the chat, let me know, because I've been hearing a lot of conspiracy theories about this group, asking their congregation to do crazy extremist type things. Or I heard they are an extremist group. I think this also is a group that's teaching that polygamy stuff and other sick stuff. There's people in that group teaching that. So, wow, it's quite ironic that this father is a part of this same cult extremist group. This Black Hebrew Israelite group seems to be very demonic, and they are clearly a cult. I did not know that he was a part of, oh gosh, guys, this makes even more sense, because that group is dangerous. I would not recommend anybody go to that group. They are definitely a cult, and they are leading a lot of people astray into some sick, sinister stuff. So now this is making more sense, because now we know the exact group that he was a part of. Sick. Oh my gosh, guys, this is even more sad.
led the girls to cut themselves off from the world. She says Manuel followed a sect of the Black Hebrew Israelite faith, which has been categorized as a hate group.
So here's what they do. Okay. Since the late 1960s, the radical Hebrew Israelite ideology splintered to form increasingly anti-Semitic, anti-white, anti-LGBTQ, xenophobic, misogynistic sector of groups who preach they and only they are the true Israelites of the Bible and perpetuate the Semitic, so small font, belief that so-called Jews have stolen their identity and birthright. That's their belief. It's sick. They just teach this very extremist hatred type mindset towards different people, even women. And they think that they are the high supreme being Israelites, the chosen people of the Bible, and they have the birthright. They just teach these really extremist type sick things, and they were established 1969. They are across the United States. You got to be very careful of this hate group. It is very, they are in YouTube, guys. They're on YouTube. They're YouTubers. Some of them out there are YouTubers. Be very careful. If you hear them talk about Hebrew Israelites, Black Hebrew Israelites, I would get to running. I'm just saying, because they are a hate group and they're taking people out and they're leading people astray. But let's see what else is saying. This is such small font. I can't read it, but I'm going to try to read this because I want to know more about this group. Because I've been hearing a lot about this group lately. Let me know if you guys have been too, because I've been hearing way too much bad things, not good things. Disclaimer, the SPLC uses the term radical Hebrew Israelites to differentiate from the greater Hebrew Israelite faith. So there's two different groups. There's a radical Hebrew Israelite group, and then there's a Hebrew Israelite faith. Hebrew Israelites should not be confused with Black Jews or Jewish individuals of color. SPLC no longer refers to these groups as solely Black Hebrew Israelites, as they are Latin and indigenous members of these groups, and this one is awful, and there are non-radical sectors of Hebrew Israelite faith who identify as Black Hebrew Israelites. Wow, this is making so much sense. Because there's another YouTuber on here who's a part of that Black Hebrew Israelites faith who is now on this role of teaching polygamy and other perverted type stuff. And now it makes sense that these groups, they're sick. And their ideology is all about hate. That's what it says here. Extremist info. They founded 1969 across the United States, and their ideology is general hate. They just hate. They hate all these different groups. They hate them. And that is not of God. Even if, God will chastise those that are, in sin, but he doesn't teach hatred, like pure hatred. The people of the Bible that were full of hatred that I recall were the Pharisees. They were full of so much hatred, and they just ridiculed anyone who did anything wrong. I mean, I remember they were so angry at Jesus because he worked on the fast. He worked on the day of the day of the Sabbath. He worked on the day of Sabbath, and they were just appalled. Not works, but you know what I mean. He was doing things on the day of Sabbath, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you sinner! You're not supposed to work on Sabbath." So it's just like they remind me of the Pharisees because that's how they were. They were extremists in the Bible, and they were full of hate. They just had a general hate for anyone who was not perfect in their eyes. So you got to be careful of people that are the modern Pharisees. I think the Black Hebrew Israelites are the modern Pharisees in the Bible, but they're worse. Look what this guy did who's a part of that group. He manipulated his kids into killing themselves. That's what he did. He manipulated them into unintentionally, they didn't know, unintentionally killing themselves. I don't think they really knew that they were going to die. They just thought, oh, I need to do this to sacrifice to show I love God. He used fear. The continued struggle of Black indigenous people of color in America can find clear similarities in the narrative of Judaism, particularly the Bible of Exodus. All right, so you guys might want to read Exodus. Persecution, displacement, and enslavement mirror the BIPOC experience in many ways, both historically and still systematically here in America. For most of the Hebrew Israelite community, the similarity is a source of empowerment. not a cause for condemnation. For radical Hebrew Israelite groups, however, the similarities are used as the, let's see if they get back some more parts of this. This is crazy, guys. I'm still shocked that he was a part of this hate group. Wow. But it makes so much sense now when you put into context what group he was a part of and then how he manipulated these kids to do this extremist type crazy fast he made them do. I mean, fasting is okay. I do fasting, but like I said, there's healthy ways of doing it. But he did it in an extremist way because he was trying to intentionally take these kids' lives in a sinister, evil way to get back at the mother, basically. That's what I think. And he was saying, well, if I can't have my kids and have the freedom, he was a bitter madman. He probably was black too, I'm just saying, because the kids look mixed. So he probably was an angry black man, bitter and mad because the system did him wrong by giving primary custody to the mother and he only got weekends and he was angry. They are so angry at that. They hate that. They hate it when they don't get primary custody and they got to get child support. And it makes them act crazy like this. A lot of them been doing crazy stuff because of this. And the sad part is we're going to see a lot more of this. You know why? We're going to see a lot more. It's going to get more dark out there in the world because of the overturn of Roe versus Wade. Because these men are going to get angry because a lot of these women now are, all these women now are going to have to keep the babies, which I'm okay with. I'm pro-life, but I'm just saying there's going to be consequences of overturning Roe versus Wade because a lot of these women will have to keep the baby, and then they're going to get these irresponsible men who don't want to be responsible. A lot of these men don't want to be responsible for the kid. So now they're going to be able to get these kids up for child support, which they do not like child support. They don't want you in their pockets, especially these black men. I'm just saying they don't like child support and they don't like the child custody situation. They get really angry and violent when it comes to those two things. So that's going to make there's going to be on a rise of these very mass, sad, unalive of women, taking the life of women brutally and kids because of child support and child custody. So right now, the men who are in the manosphere who are toxic, they're celebrating the whole overturn of Roe versus Wade. They're like, ha ha ha, for black women, blue, right? But it's going to be really interesting when they realize the consequences that it has on them when they get these women pregnant, and now they're going to have a lot more child support. Then there's going to be a lot of the child custody situations because the system does seem to be set up to favor the woman. It appears, and I could just say that from my experience, it feels as though that because when I also practiced in family law very briefly after I left being a prosecutor for a while. I went to do a little bit of family law, and I noticed the system seemed to favor a lot of the mothers when it came to child custody, unless there was some strong evidence that the mother was neglectful or she didn't have a place for the kids to stay. Generally, a lot of times, the system somehow seemed to give the mother primary custody most of the time. I really only seen one time. And I remember I had a client that was a father, and we had to fight hard. We had to establish all the key intricate details of how this mother was irresponsible. We had to go through an extensive long brief. I remember writing a very long, massive, very meticulous brief of the details of how this woman was irresponsible with attached police reports and all kinds of stuff. I remember just that case being a very difficult case when I was battling for the father because the system seems to always kind of be in a default or a presumption of the mother getting primary custody. And that case was very difficult to finally get full custody for that father, but we had to go through extensive litigation. So that really taught me when I had women as my clients, it seemed to be an easier, smooth sailing process of getting primary custody for the mother. But when I had fathers as clients, it was very difficult. It was very difficult, extensive litigation. Lots of times making extensive briefs. I remember writing those extensive, long briefs and really having to pull lots of records to show evidence of neglect patterns of neglect from the parents. Also, sometimes showing that the mother was irresponsible and the men that she had around the children who were abusing the kids. But I remember those cases for me when I had fathers, it was difficult. It was a very difficult process to get primary custody. I did see that. So I began to see that the judicial system tends to have a presumption of favoring the mother. So once we start seeing the results of Roe versus Wade, we will begin to see these sad cases of the individuals that are toxic out there, the fathers that don't want responsibility, of brutally taking these women and kids out. Not as this man did it in a sick, kind of manipulative mind control way. They're going to be using violence. It's going to be just, I'm just saying, guys, you'll see. You'll see. You'll see. It's very sad. So I would just say those that are believers to be very prayed up, because we are going to be segueing into some dark times. And then also be on the lookout that the Republican Party's next move is to make the abortion ban to be national. Yeah. So eventually, that is their next goal, is to ban abortion nationally in all states. They will be trying to codify. They're going to try to pass a law once they get the majority capability to do so. So that is the next plan that they have. So just be on the watch for that, because a lot of people, they don't pay attention what's going on, and then they get all flustered when it happens because they weren't paying attention. It's there. The signs are there. You just need to